talk to you.
Now on 77 WABC, your New York weekend. A guy who has terrorist on speed dial. Is he gutsy or crazy? It's Aaron Klein, Investigative Radio, with WorldNet Daily Reporter and John Batchelor contributor, Aaron Klein.
The Mount of Olives, a very holy site in Judaism, located right next to the Temple Mount on the Western Wall. The Mount of Olives, of course, is also heavily associated with Christianity, with Christian prophecy. Now, the Mount of Olives contains one of the single most important cemeteries in Judaism. It goes all the way back to the Bible. In fact, biblical figures, biblical prophets are buried there. Also, an individual known as the Rambam, Nachmanides in English, buried there. And also modern Israeli figures, including the former Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin. Now, what might surprise you is that the Mount of Olives, again, located right next to the Temple Mount, located right next to the Western Wall, this Mount of Olives and its graveyard has been site very recently to incredible, rampant desecration of the graveyard. And joining me right now to discuss this unfolding situation, and it's not just desecration, apparently it is much more, including Islamic land grabs, including intimidation of Jewish figures and visitors, all right next to the Temple Mount. Joining me is Menachem Lubinsky, who is from the International Community for the Preservation of the Mount of Olives. Now, in Hebrew, the Mount of Olives is called Har HaZeitim. Mr. Lubinsky, first of all, tell us about the desecrations that are going on at the cemetery.
Well, the desecrations include routine destruction of graves, strewing of garbage throughout Mount of Olives, trampling on graves, playing soccer there, storing construction material, turning it into everything but the holiness that it deserves.
And you also note here that there's violence directed at visitors?
Yes, this has been going on for many years. Visitors have been routinely stoned. Some have been firebombed. Just as recent as a week ago, a family going to Har HaZeitim was stoned at the traffic circle approach to Har HaZeitim. And there are many, many Americans who have stories of having been attacked on Har HaZeitim in the past few years.
By Har HaZeitim, again, he's referring here to the Mount of Olives. Amazingly, there's a legal building on land that is zoned for cemetery use. What is that about?
There's a mosque that is directly adjacent to the burial ground where Prime Minister Begin is buried. It was a very small mosque. They're now extending it. It is officially zoned as a cemetery. The municipality of Jerusalem has issued a stop order, but that has been violated. And it's kind of like an eyesore, and aside from the fact that many thousands of mourners who can't have access there because the parking lot is used by the mosque.
So in other words, what the mosque is doing here is very similar to what they have done also on the Temple Mount, the holiest site for Judaism, where they're essentially turning it into a giant mosque. Now, the obvious question, although for me, I am based in Israel. I'm broadcasting today from the WABC Small Business Authority satellite studios in Tel Aviv, Israel, where I have reported from for the last 5.5, 6 years. So I'm not really surprised by these kinds of findings. I've seen similar things with regard to other holy sites, like the Tomb of the Patriarchs, one of the holiest sites also in Judaism, also on the Temple Mount itself, desecration we saw with Joseph's tomb. I reported from there at the time and afterwards, and it's in one of my books, Schmoozing with Terrorists, where I personally talked to the Islamic desecrators of Joseph's tomb. They claim that it's a very holy site in Islam. At least that's what they did until the Jews got out, and then they burned part of it down and then turned some of that into a mosque. So I'm not surprised by this, but the obvious question is, how in the world is this going on in Israel, in a Jewish state, in one of the holiest cemeteries in the Jewish tradition? How is it possible that this is happening?
Well, to begin with, the reason that my brother Abe founded this committee in May of 2010 was because the state controller of Israel, Michal Lindenstrauss, came out with a stinging 24-page report, in a sense, indicting previous governments for the neglect that has been going on the Mount of Olives since 1967. As it turns out, our parents, my brothers and my parents, are buried on the Mount of Olives. So we've been going there for at least 25 years, and we've seen some of that desecration firsthand. But if you talk about desecration, you have to go back to the period of the Jordanian rule, which unprecedented in history. Even the Nazis did not destroy as many graves as they did. They destroyed 75,000 graves to build the infrastructure for the hotel, roads, and neighborhoods. Har HaZeitim in the years of 1930s, 1940s was said to have 205,000 graves.
Well, so hold on, wait a minute, because the Muslims have long claimed that this is a holy site to them, and the same thing with regard to the Temple Mount, and yet the king of Jordan, during the time of the Jordanian occupation of Jerusalem until 1967, didn't once visit the area, so it's certainly not the Western Wall. So are you saying that this is not exactly the holy site for Islam that they claim that it is?
Well, I'm not at all disputing that whatever holy sites they claim Jerusalem as Al-Quds is their holy site as well. But what is clear is that it is the holiest and the oldest Jewish cemetery, that there were 205,000 Jewish graves. The small Muslim cemetery that is on the Mount of Olives, it pales by comparison to the large number of graves that are Jewish graves. The Jewish history is very much comes alive there when you talk about David having been there. You talk about the high priests having prepared for their work at the Temple Mount. When you talk about the burning of the ashes, when you talk about the fact that this was the mountain where the new Jewish month was proclaimed. This is very much, so much a part of Jewish history, culture, and heritage that you can't separate the Mount of Olives from Judaism. But for the Jordanians to have done that, there are some studies that the Nazis, in its totality and marching through Europe, destroyed some 12,000 graves, but the Jordanians destroyed 75,000 graves using tombstones for roads. It is only now, as a result of the efforts of the International Committee, that thousands of graves are being restored, that areas are being cleaned, even where there are no tombstones, so that those graves are not violated. For the first time in the history of Har HaZeitim, there are now surveillance cameras that are throughout the mountain. Very shortly, we hope to have a new police presence there. The dynamics of Har HaZeitim will change and has to change because, as I said before, this is Judaism. This is the history of Judaism.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has to change, but the history, according to the Palestinian Authority, of course, is all lies. There is no Jewish historic connection to Jerusalem. There is no Christian connection. In fact, actually, when the Waqf, the Islamic custodians of the Temple Mount, were caught at the time, this was in the 90s, and then again very recently in 2007, where amazingly they were given permission by the Israeli government to dig up, at the time, Solomon stables and other areas on the Temple Mount. They were caught red-handed throwing out Jewish artifacts that proved that the area, of course, is historically connected to Judaism. Now, the idea of graves, the concept of violating a grave of any religion is really just absurd, and it shows the sickness here, because I was based in the Gaza Strip, in Gush Katif, in the Jewish communities of Gaza as a reporter, and I will never forget that when Israel had to uproot the homes of Gush Katif, of the Jewish communities of Gaza, they also needed to remove the cemeteries. I spoke with a mother whose soldier son was killed in Gaza, was buried there, and she was beside herself that the bones needed to be removed from the soil lest they possibly be violated from Hamas, so which obviously Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. So the question becomes, because just a few weeks ago, I believe it was, somebody else, another Muslim, was caught desecrating on the Mount of Olives, where he was there for something like 30, 45 minutes, and he was caught on tape, and then it wasn't the police, it was private security guards, apparently, that detained him until the police came, where he said that he was paid 1,000 shekel, which is about $350, $400. The question becomes, is this institutionalized desecration on the Mount of Olives? By that, I mean the Palestinian Authority or other Palestinian groups, or is this happening on the side by just characters who are not affiliated with the Palestinians?
Well, you characterize that very well. There seems to be a historical denial that Har HaZeitim, that the Mount of Olives, really is part of Jewish history. history. If you talk to the Palestinians, this becomes all just a part of the larger Ras Al Amoud neighborhood. Hence, they play soccer there, schoolgirls go to work through the cemetery, workers walk on the graves. It's nothing more than a field to them that's adjacent to the neighborhood. There's no understanding of the sanctity of what a grave represents. Even that perpetrator that you discussed received only 3 months, even though he was paid $1,000 by someone. In the United States, if you destroy a grave, in New York State, for example, there's a minimum jail sentence, mandatory jail sentence of 3.5 to 4 years.
Yes, and the guy here received 3 months.
That to destroy a grave is to destroy someone's history, someone's connection to his loved ones. And why is it that Israel, which has provided access to all religions to their holy sites, the only people that don't have access because they're being stoned on a regular basis are Jews?
Yeah, well, I'll
Jews
tell you,
are being denied access to go pray at the grave of a loved one, of a holy in a holy site.
Yeah, although actually it is the Israeli government that sometimes also denies access to Jews. This time I'm talking the Temple Mount, where Jews and Christians are only allowed up for about an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon, and Muslims can go up 24 hours a day. Menachem Lubinsky of the International Committee for the Preservation of the Mount of Olives. In Hebrew it's called Har HaZeitim, and that Hebrew is important because his website is www.saveharhazeitim. I'll spell that for you, HARHAZEITIM.com. Menachem, thank you for being here. Questions and comments next, 1-800-848-WABC. Now, I should tell you that all of the information that I enumerated for you today on this program is posted right now at kleinonline.com. Check it out. For example, we